So what is the criminalization of homelessness?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I think about how I like to think about it is that criminalization of anything is basically just a policy choice, right? So it's a policy choice that politicians or society, however you want to think about it, make about how to respond to a particular social issue. And so when it comes to criminalization, what it means is that we're using the criminal justice system as sort of a primary or sort of main response to a particular social issue. So I think a good sort of example, if I can kind of digress a little bit, is thinking about substance use and substance abuse, right? So historically, one of our kind of main ways of dealing with or sort of deciding to deal with substance abuse or substance use was through the criminal justice system. So we sort of criminalized drugs. And now we're sort of having a conversation where we're starting to rethink that a little bit, and we're moving kind of hopefully slowly away from that kind of criminal justice response as our main tool for dealing with it, to thinking a bit more about how we could do it differently, like using a health response, right? If we think about how we might use the kind of the health system to respond. And so you can say the same thing for the criminalization of homelessness. It's basically a policy decision or a set of policy decisions to respond to the issue of homelessness and its kind of surrounding issues, like panhandling and things like that, with the criminal justice system. And so where we sort of see it kind of turn up historically is around, like, using laws against things like vagrancy or loitering, which are these kind of very vague laws that basically gave the authorities, the police usually, if there was anyone they kind of didn't sort of like the look of, or sort of seemed out of place or didn't have his place to go, they could sort of invoke these kind of really vague vagrancy or loitering laws. And a lot of those laws have sort of since been kind of struck down, or sort of are still on the books. Like, we still have vagrancy law on the book in Canada, I think, but it's just not used very much. But what's come up in its place is sort of other types of laws. And so, for example, in Ontario, there's the Safe Streets Act, which is sort of, it criminalizes panhandling. So there's sort of, it's using, it's not a sort of a criminal law, which makes it kind of interesting. It's not in the criminal code, but it's using basically kind of a provincial bylaw of sorts, this piece of provincial legislation, to say that if you're caught panhandling, there's some kind of words around it to make it a bit more palatable, but basically it's if you're caught panhandling, then you can be fined, and if you don't pay your fines, you can go to jail. And so that's sort of a good example of sort of a kind of a modern day criminalization. And then there's sort of some interesting conversations happening around other kind of subtle ways that you criminalize homelessness. And people are talking now about this kind of concept of banishment, where you sort of can use these sort of trespassing laws and these kind of laws like the Safe Streets Act, which aren't criminal, but they're kind of pieces of legislation, or banning people from parks, banning people from transit systems. And so it's not criminal, but you're using these little laws, and basically it's forcing people. It's really, a lot of these laws are kind of focused on people who are deemed kind of out of place, right? So if you appear as if you don't kind of belong in a particular area, these kind of vague laws can be used to kind of involve the authorities, who then kind of have the authorization to kind of move you somewhere else, right? So they can kick you out of the park, they can kick you off the transit system. They can, there's even laws that can ban someone from a particular sort of specific geographic area. And so that's, I think, this sort of kind of the new or newer sort of iteration of the criminalization of homelessness. And then, not to mention that you sort of have still, like, the criminalization of drug use, because there's such sort of overlap sometimes between substance abuse and homelessness. That also kind of functions as a way to kind of criminalize homelessness. Same with things like sex work or prostitution, right? Criminalizing those kinds of kind of subsistence activities, we call them, can also sort of be kind of deemed a way of criminalizing homelessness.
Mhm.